It's a pleasure to be here, and certainly when somebody says it's my work, it certainly wasn't my work. This is very much a team effort with lots of people doing some good work all over the place, and I had the privilege of overseeing some of that. In the best of all possible worlds, we would probably just take Simon's 4-year-old and have them follow a physician for a day with 3 or 4 key messages. But since we don't live in that world particularly, we have to come up with some other things. And so what we've been involved in Saskatchewan since 1997 is RxFile's academic detailing. Now, academic detailing is a term that you often have to define a little bit. And when I started off, I never used the term except to say that, oh, we do physician office visits and discuss drug therapy. And then we started to tag in academic detailing. And it's academic in the sense that it's not industry. And it's detailing in the sense that it's like what industry does, going out and having one-on-one and small group conversations about decision making. But it's done from a social marketing perspective or a not-for-profit perspective, something that's in the best interest of patient and society. So that's what RxFile's academic detailing is about. And I'd like to share a little bit about our story in working with some of the antibiotic-related things. Just my disclosures, I don't receive any money from industry. I do work for a few academic detailing services here in Saskatchewan, in Ontario, a training service out of Boston, and the odd other service that might work with evidence-based medicine. So we know some of the challenges. We've got some information that can help. How do we get it to prescribers so that change can actually happen? We've been discussing some of the different resources that are there and that type of thing. And in our particular situation, we do those one-on-one conversations with providers. So I would like to take a look at this from 3 different angles. The first one is, what is the preparatory work that goes into the academic detailing that a group might do? How do we train the detailers? And then what does it actually look like once we take it to the streets and try to make doing the right thing a little bit easier? So if we think about some of the prep work, of course we're going to start with what's in the literature, what's in the evidence. Then very soon we're going to go and talk with clinicians in practice and say, what are you wrestling with? What are you coming up against? What are you doing? What do you want to know? What questions come up? And those type of things feed into what we hope will be a very realistic and practical discussion once we're actually out there. Then, of course, we want to check in with best practice groups. And so in our case, we're checking in with the Antimicrobial Stewardship groups in Regina and Saskatoon. We're checking in with some of our clinicians up north in Isle of Cross and La Ronge. And we're talking with different disciplines, microbiology in both Saskatoon, Regina, and other groups. And we're trying to get a good feel for what's out there so that we're practical, we've kind of considered all things, and we're not blindsided once we're out talking about the real issues in the physician's office. If we think a little more about some of the prep work, in terms of evidence, we're going to look at systematic reviews, randomized controlled trials, and do some really deep digging there. In a conversation, we rarely need to actually go that deep in a conversation and talk about a specific trial, but sometimes you do. And when you do, then you want to be prepared and you want to have the confidence to know what are you certain about, what are you not certain about, what are the gray zones, and how do you contextualize that for a good patient decision. If we think of the guideline stewardship groups, I've already mentioned some of those, but choosing wisely, some of the guidelines, the bugs and drugs, have a guideline that comes out. There's an Orange Book guideline out of Ontario that we'll take a look at, and of course the various official societies that publish guidelines on specific things. We'll take a look at all those. Look for the consistencies, and that's important. That's hugely valuable. And then we look for the inconsistencies, and that of course tells you a little bit sometimes where the gray zones are, what you might be thinking about with geographic variation and that type of thing. And hopefully that creates a good richness of discussion when we're able to think about those different angles. This is just a slide that that acknowledges the various people that contributed to our 2 actual sessions that went out to providers, both physicians and nurse practitioners. And so you can see the variety of people that had input into the process, the information as it was coming together, the questions that we needed to ask, and exactly how to get out there and deliver it. So it would range from everyone from somebody like Justin Kozar, who's on our Antimicrobial Stewardship Committee in Saskatoon, Joe Blondeau, who's a microbiologist, Jessica Minion, and Lindsay Nicole, who's one of the infectious disease physicians who's published a lot on the urinary tract infections. And we had her join us by teleconference when we trained our detailers. So it covers a lot of people in the prep work. I'm going to flip through just a variety of some of the material, but not really comment too deep because I think you'll be more interested in some of how we go about actually doing the detailing. So if we think about our first topic, took a look at some of those common infections: bronchitis, community-acquired pneumonia, pharyngitis, acute sinusitis. And of course, here we're looking overall at things that are, in a lot of cases, predominantly viral. And when they are, how do we move towards using less antibiotics when that's appropriate? And so this was the deep discussion that delved into the evidence and practicalities around that. And so we'll come up with some fairly simple statements about, antibiotics not recommended in acute uncomplicated bronchitis, but why? And what does that actually look like from a physician's vantage point? And what do you do? We came up with some posters that can be posted around, and I've certainly seen lots of those in the offices as I've been out and about doing some detailing lately. So some of them do get used, and we've got some good stories around that. This one here, I just put the green arrow on there for studies showing that an antibiotic provides no actual clinical improvement compared to not using antibiotics. So that's kind of the key thing that we want patients to be thinking about, and then the physician can make that assessment as to whether this is the case for that patient that best represents that patient or not. In some of the considerations, you're going to delve into practical things like, but I'm still coughing, and I've been coughing now for 2 weeks. And that's going to be a barrier. So what do we know about the evidence around that in a viral and in a bacterial context? And so we'll comment on some of those things so the physician has something to actually work with and say and discuss with the patient. And then just looking at some of the evidence, and once you get into the evidence, sometimes you find that some of the very clear recommendations that you make, they're not quite as clear in the evidence. The evidence can sometimes be a little wishy-washy and things like that. And so if you go to that Cochrane review, you find, well, you do have a little bit of a reduction in cough for 1 out of every 6 patients or so. Oh, and look at that. For 1 out of every 5 patients, you have an increased a gastrointestinal related adverse event. So how much is that little bit of a benefit, or that shorten your cough by half a day? So some of that will show up in the evidence too, and are our detailers ready to discuss it at that level, not just make the simple, you shouldn't use antibiotics for this, which, yeah, sure. But what does the evidence actually say? What do we say in real life? What resonates in terms of the patient coming and presenting? So we try to go through some of those things at that deep level. This is just a clip from one of the newsletters in terms of what actually do you do in terms of symptom management, thinking through the various things, thinking through some of the evidence that's out there for the options, and noting a few things that, no, we really don't have evidence for this. We probably shouldn't be using something like an oral or inhaled corticosteroid in a simple acute uncomplicated bronchitis. Sinusitis, the same type of thing, and think through watchful waiting. You think of the delayed prescription options. You think through that little ring diagram there that shows, well, how many patients with sinusitis are actually going to require an antibiotic. So 98% viral, doesn't do them any good. And of the bacterial ones, 1.7% improve without the antibiotic, so you're left with about 0.3%. Well, that's a nice little powerful thing to think about and to explain to patients and to have posted. And we got some really good feedback from some of our physicians related to how that was useful in some of the cases. And of course, there's a variety of different pearls that come into play for that as well. I'll just mention that we do include, along with these very specific kind of key message discussions, we'll include some supporting clinical tools. And ArcsFiles, since the very beginning, has always had these drug comparison charts. We updated and expanded our antibiotic comparison chart. And I think that's just served an extra element of providing a bit of visibility, a bit of resourcefulness after we're gone. And if people get used to using those, which a lot of them do, then we become a resource down the road, and we can update this anytime, as well as when we're in a detailing session, we can comment on a lot of questions that come up that are outside these very narrow key message areas of discussion. And so those are often found to be very useful. You just notice I go through the adverse events, contraindications, drug interactions, monitoring, dosing cost. At the very bottom, there's a little smiley face there, and that just reminds me that we even note which formulations taste good to kids. And if you wonder, like, is that just, did you taste it, or how do you get that? Well, there is a publication on what tastes good. And then, of course, that can vary a little bit, so sometimes you do a little bit of survey, and I've tasted the odd thing myself as well. So, of course, I'm not a kid anymore. Okay. This is just a nice little color graphic about pregnancy and lactation. And it just served to be something that the physicians really like to talk about, because this comes up and it made it kind of clear. And they said, oh, I didn't know. And then we had a little discussion there, and they found some of those things very useful. But what I really want to move into is some of the aspects of what makes detailing unique, valued, and hopefully effective. And I think it deals a lot with addressing the barriers that are out there. It's not uncommon for somebody to say, yeah, I know, this is viral, but patients expect an antibiotic. It takes a lot longer to talk to somebody about it than it does to write them a prescription. And this is just a practical reality for me. If I don't give them a prescription, I get a nasty note online, and that's not the reason I went into medicine either, Or if they spend 2 to 3 hours driving, don't they deserve something? Are they going to be happy just going away? So we try to talk through those barriers. Of course, we talk about enablers to address barriers. Sometimes that enabler is going to be just a fact. Sometimes it's going to be a tool, such as what do you do for a viral infection prescription. Sometimes it could be a poster, and we try to deal with some of those things. One section of our newsletter specifically went out to clinicians who were having some success in their discussions with patients. And we said, so these are the things we're hearing are barriers to doing what we want to do, even when we want to do it. How do you manage that? And we got some possible clinician responses. So this is a way to do some scripting, maybe ways to put it into words that you might use when you're addressing that person who says, yes, but I've been coughing for 2 weeks, or I feel really rotten. But the last time I came, I got an antibiotic, and it was exactly the same thing. So what do you do when you hear some of those things? And this is just a few of what the patient says scenarios that we tried to address. Our tools are available on our website, and you can go to the antibiotic-related searches or search page and pull up any of these and certainly use them if you want, and I do have some at our table. Really quickly, take a guess game show. I'm just going to give you the first one. 60 years staying power. Does anybody have a guess what that is? Nitrofurantoin. It's been around forever. And if you look at the sensitivities, susceptibility results, still like really high up there if you compare it to some other things. This is just to say that we did some graphics and sometimes we had some fun with it, and we discussed some of the concepts in terms of a little bit of, what does that actually look like? How might we advertise it if we were on TV? I won't go through them all. When we come to training the detailers, about 6 weeks in advance, we send them a reading package, and they get going on some of the reading in their own time. 4 weeks in advance, we start having upskilling webinars. So we get together by WebEx or something like that, and we'll go through some of the things we expect to encounter, some of the core things we want to cover before our in-person training. 1 week in advance, we usually try to get the detailers to work through what I call the key messages. What are the features, benefits, barriers, and enablers to those key messages? And they have to do a bit of homework on this and thinking for themselves and bring this to our in-person training. And this is what that homework might look like. And basically, you're trying to think of, well, how do you sell this idea? How do you defend it, back it up? What's the evidence for it? What are the uncertainties around it? Be realistic. And what are the barriers you're going to encounter? And what can you do to overcome those barriers? So when we actually get to in-person training, we spend most of that time in dialogue. There's very, very little lecture. We're really hearing from a few of our guest specialists. We are thinking through the barriers that we're going to encounter, and then we do a lot of these little role plays, observed role plays, where we actually talk to each other as if we were the person making this argument against what we want to accomplish. And how do you do that both in a way that's relationship building, because that's important, realistic, as well as true to the evidence. And so we have a lot of fun with that, and then of course we compare notes and we try to say, no, this is realistic, or this could work, or I like the way so-and-so handled that, or I said this and boom, we ran into a big problem right away. And it's nice to do that when you're amongst friends, and that prepares you to go out when you're seeing people who you don't see as frequently, and you need to navigate some very sometimes sensitive issues. So we do those practice detailings, and then we go through a whole session as to what it might actually look like. So that type of detailing is really around the communication. How do you communicate well? How do you communicate persuasively? How do you communicate in a way that's non-judgmental? And how do you build a relationship and a service over time so that people start to look to you for realistic, evidence-based, practical answers? This is our team, and this is an example of a detailing session, except that neither him or I are smiling very much, so it's not a good example. This is a much better one, and this is the group that I work with a little bit in the United States, and they do a detailer training in terms of the concept of academic detailing as a communication and a service. And they do those at least twice a year. And sometimes we participate. If we have new detailers, they may take those in. However, sometimes we host detailing training sessions in Canada amongst the academic detailing services that are here. So we have academic detailing services in British Columbia, Saskatchewan, a little bit in Alberta, out of Edmonton, and some elsewhere. As well as Dalhousie in Nova Scotia. And then in Ontario, we're currently in about 4 years of the Centre for Effective Practice doing some academic detailing there. And so we actually do have a workshop coming up in late April, because we have quite a few Canadian people ready to be detailed, or ready to start academic detailing. And so we'll be going through a 3-day, fairly intense basic training at that time. In terms of a little bit of what it looked like when we took our topic to the streets, we probably talked with 300 plus prescribers in person, a lot of one-on-one conversations, a few small group, 1,600 newsletters mailed out, 100 plus people participating in the pharmacy grand rounds. And then there were a few social marketing things, such as doing a little bit of a poster on the side of a bus, which was similar to what Bugs and Drugs had done. And we contacted them before we did up our own version of that type of social media message, as well as a few of us, Dr. Pir Mohammed, Justin Kozer, myself, were on the radio too early on one cold morning. But we got to talk a little bit about, somebody had seen this bus and they wanted to talk about it on the radio and do a bit of an interview. So we got a bit of press on that one as well. The viral prescription you're aware of, it is available in various languages, and of course it's one of many patient supports that not just come from our own program but are available from some of the other outstanding programs across Canada. And then just thinking of things that might make it easier to do the right thing. So we have an antibiotic harms page. It's not the type of page you want to give to absolutely everybody, but you might want to give it to some people who really think there's zero harm to taking an antibiotic, so why don't we just do it when we're in doubt? Oh, okay, well, is that really true? And we discussed that in a way that you could share or give to the patient and have them maybe reconsider some of those things once they look at the evidence. Impact, we do a bit of impact analysis just related mostly to intention to apply a given key message. At times we have looked at some drug utilization type of data. We haven't done that recently, and we didn't do that on this. But with this one, you can see with one of the messages about 10% kind of thought that they might change what they do based on our discussion. With one of the other key messages, about 56% that this said that this could change their practice. So it all depends, and that's probably pretty realistic too, depending on the key message, what they're currently doing. Not everybody's doing everything wrong all the time right at the beginning, right? And not everybody's ready to change either. So you're dealing with a variety of things. But this is just to say that we try to get some of that initial feedback as well as lots of specific comments on what stood out to you. And that provides for some interesting analysis and reflection. These are just a few materials that we have that I won't go into, except to say that you can check things out on our website if you wish. We do have an academic detailer code of conduct for Canada. And so, we say, be prepared to provide accurate, informative, practical, balanced information. Well, that sounds all right. I'll skip to number 9. Remember, you're a guest of the person you're visiting. This just reminds me that so much of the success or failure of this particular service depends on how you come across, And I ran into somebody once who I just said, even when they violently disagree with me, I can't help but like them. Like they had that kind of a personality. And we want to train and think and develop that kind of attitude that we can disagree profoundly with somebody and have them know that they're still respected, accepted, and valued as part of the team and for that discussion and because we're human beings. So we try to convey that. I'll skip through this, a few kind of buzzwords related to academic detailing, and just go to my very, very final slide and say that this is certainly is a team effort, a lot of input, a lot of value, and if you just do it as a one-off kind of session, you've never done academic detailing before, you do a lot of groundbreaking. There's a lot of skepticism. How are you going to get in the offices? They don't know you yet, so there's a lot of some of that type of thing that happens. But as you do it over and over again, 2 or 3 sessions, and now we've been doing it for 21 years, you start to get more and more people buying into it, hopefully, if you do it in a way that offers value. And so there's something to be said for just doing something once, and you hope that you make an impact with that. But I think there's even more to be said with building some brand visibility, building a service that people look to help them troubleshoot when they really do want to do the right thing and just don't know exactly how to go about it. Thank you very much.